Okie dokie. Now, let's go back to our manual, because now we're going to get a different coloured LED. Something that we can do though, what have I called these materials in the array? They're called blue, green, orange, red, purple. Perfect. So what I can do at the end of this is actually do my first little line of logging. And for this, I'm going to just nip into another code. I will talk you through it when we get there. Doesn't matter which one I go into, if I phone again. Because the debug coding for KTaNE is quite specific because of the way we have the log file analyzer set up so that people can check their answers afterwards. So it goes debug.log format, and the difference between that and log is that you can just put your variable information in at the end. We're going to change this to T words, number, and then that instance there that's what this was all about, the module ID counter. It's just counting how many instances of that module are on the BOM. So this will come out as T words number 1. That's where the module ID is. We can get rid of all of that. I'm going to type our own message in a minute, and we can get rid of all of that. So this is the basic structure for writing a log for KTaNE. Very often, if I'm doing a little module like this one, I'll do all the logging at the end. But I think actually it's quite helpful if you're starting out to do the logging as you go to keep track of what's going on. So here we can actually write the LED is, and then we have square brackets 1. So 0 is going to refer to module ID. 0 is going to refer to module ID. 1 is going to refer to whatever I put in there. And then a full stop. What do we want to put in there? Well, we want to put in whatever the colour was. So in this case it was LED options. What was the index number? Because it was from an array, we need to take LED index. LED index. Now that is just going to report material. We don't want the material because we can't read the material. So we put dot name. Now I think this might actually report as an instance because I've done something slightly wrong. We don't want it to report the name as an instance, but I think it probably will anyway. In which case I'll just put a replace in a second. Oh no, it's done it right. The LED is red. So that's quite nice, isn't it? A little bit of logging for us right there. And instantly our code is starting to take shape. The LED is purple. And it still glows in the dark, which is really nice. Even though purple never comes up on here, so you've got red, green, blue, orange. That's the thing I should probably check. People might think that purple equals red and blue. People get too literal with these manuals sometimes. Why is there an error on the top of the console? You know, TW, I've been wondering that for a little while myself. It's to do with this modified asset bundler. So you might want to ask River about it, actually. Because the asset bundler I've got on here is not the one that's in the mod kit, because I'm building on Mac, I've got a slightly different one. It's something to do with VR. It says couldn't open applications Unity, contents Unity, extensions Unity, VSR, bleh, and so on, etc., etc. But I see the word Mac OS. Unfortunately, I also can't make it go away, which is extremely irritating, because apart from that, my code is very clean. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that is. I'm assuming it's to do with the new asset bundler, because this is the first sort of time I've used it today. Yeah, so it's coming back every time. But, yeah, hey-ho. It's not killing the program, and it's not killing the build either, which is the most important thing. Yeah, they show up on Windows. Okay, fine. I don't know. I don't even consider VR when I'm doing this sort of thing. Okay, so we've got the colour and we've logged the colour. Next, I said we wanted to pick the words and then we'll pick the column. And we're going to pick the words first because it's easier to, once we've got the... Oh, did I say we were going to pick the column first? Hang on. No, we're going to pick the column first. We're going to pick the column first and then the words. And the reason we're going to do that is because of I don't know how to do index of properly. I've done it before, but not in a way that I'd like to show nearly a dozen people on the internet when I'm trying to explain how to mod in a sensible way. So we're going to do column first. So we need to... Actually, no, I don't need to do column first. Now, this is where I talk about something that I was going to talk about before, which is where you have a coding plan. This is my current coding plan. I meant to start it and then didn't. The word of arrays going to have length of 20. Quite right, TW. The word arrays are going to have lengths of 20. Now, this is where Ash and I would probably differ in our coding methods. Ash would probably do, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Ash would probably do something like, actually he'd probably do something completely different, he wouldn't do a module like this, but he'd probably do something like that, do an array of arrays. I'm not going to do an array of arrays because I don't know how to do an array of arrays, and I'm not going to keep saying array of arrays. I'm going to do 4 separate arrays for the 4 different lists, five separate arrays for the 5 different lists. Okay, and then once the list is determined, I'm going to pick 4 words from each of those arrays and shuffle them about in a different order, and then I'm going to order them correctly so that I know what the answers are. That's essentially how I'm going to go. I'll write that in my coding plan because it would be a good thing to pretend I've got a coding plan even though I don't. Set up prefab, and again this is good for sort of beginner modules rather than I tend to keep the plan in my head, but if you want a sort of structure of how to go. Incidentally, my phone has just died, so I might not be checking the chat quite so regularly anymore, just FYI. So I'd go setup prefab, and then I'd go choose light color. Then I'd go set up word lists, word arrays. Pick correct array based on Edgework. Pick 4 words at random from that list and assign to the buttons. Determine the correct order of those words. Program the button presses, something else, and then profit. Okay, that is the plan. Array of arrays intensifies, yeah. The drawstring is about to intensify when I just step onto a Twitch for a minute and see that I've got, well, apparently I've got 7 viewers watching now, but I've also got about 13 in my chat, so I'm not quite sure how many I've got, but you're all very welcome, all of you. I will probably, it's looking increasingly likely I'm not going to finish this tonight because I'm going into slightly more detail than I planned to, which means I'm not moving as fast as I normally would on implementation, but I think that's okay. I hope what I'm saying is making some sort of sense. I'm going to go on a bit longer, but it is approaching midnight, and I told Mrs. F I'd be done between midnight and 1, so let's see what else we can get done. So, according to my coding list, I've done those 2, so I can cross those off. Set up word arrays is next. So this is going to be a lot of setting up data into my inspector, because, as you pointed out, I've got 5 lists of 20 words. They're all the same 20 words, but that's still 100 things that I need to tell the computer. And because I'm a moron, as I mentioned earlier on, I managed to delete the HTML file, so I've only got this PDF to work from. So let's get started. Public string. Now, string, as we said, int is words, material is a material, renderer is an object that has colours on it. A boolean is a binary true or false. A string is words. Okay, it's your basic words thing. And this is going to be a string array. It's going to be 20 long, but I don't need to define that here. And we're going to call this column 1. Perhaps not the most helpful name to call it in the world, that's what I'm going to go with. And I'm going to copy and paste that 5 times. 2, 3, 4, 5. Now if I go into my inspect, we'll see 5 new arrays pop up. That can close down now because I've done with LED options. Column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, column 5. And they're all going to be 20 long, so I'm going to do them one at a time, and I'm going to see how fast I can do this, because I've already done array stuff with you. So this is exactly the same, the only difference is it's using words. So I've got to copy and paste 100 words, so talk among yourselves for a few minutes just while I do this, because this is going to be extremely boring. But I also know that this PDF is correct, and so I need to copy them directly from it. While I'm doing this, you could probably discuss more efficient ways that I could be doing this. Not that I find this particularly inefficient, because I can at least see it. I could possibly define this array within the code and just copy and paste directly from the PDF. That would probably work if I hadn't deleted the HTML. That having been said, I have got a list of these words as they appeared in an Excel document, so that might be a more efficient way of doing it, possibly. But again, this was the subject of the conversation I was having with a few people in modding the other day. Is it more efficient to do define words in code or define things in the inspector? This is an example of one where I think if you've got things written down, it would be more efficient to do it in the code actually. Timwi pointed out if you're using arbitrary stuff, i.e. stuff that could be anything, such as these words for example, it's often easier to do it in the inspector. If you're doing a stack of data that's algorithmically generated, then of course it makes more sense to do it in the code because it's going to be different every time. Whereas these word lists are going to be the same every time I do them. I've run out of monologue halfway through column 2. So I start reciting Shakespeare. I really want to do a Shakespeare mod at some point. That'll be coming up at some point. Don't know when. I need to think of something big to do for my 50th. Although, that having been said, this one that I'm doing right here, T-words, this is module number 44, which means this is volume 4, because all my missions, in theory, have 11 modules in each. So this would see the conclusion of volume 4, which is a bit bonkers, because in my mind I only started doing volume 4 about 2 days ago, which is obviously not true, but there we go. Right, moving on to column 3. At the end of column 3 I'm going to check in with the chat, so I hope you've been discussing some interesting things. I feel like the teacher said, right, I'm going to give you 5 more minutes to finish your discussion, and then I want to hear from you about all the things that I've said. I don't know if I've said anything that interesting or anything that's worth discussion, other than how could I find a more efficient way of populating these arrays. That's why I'm going to come back before I've actually finished them, in case there was a significantly more efficient way of populating column 4 and column 5. So I think when you do coding with Royal Flush, it's just a lot of sitting around doing quite tedious repetitive tasks. But hopefully this is, what you've seen so far has been quite interesting. You've got about 4 more copy pastes, and then I'm going to have a look at your comments before I finish off. Tabernacular, Terpsicorian, and Tautocronus. Okay, ready or not? Let's see what you've got to say. I would choose to do a 2D array exposed to Unity, but Unity doesn't immediately present those in the inspector, so I then have to pull out the inspector stuff if that's a thing. That I'll do a 2D array in code. In my code that I'm coding right now, I'm not using an array of arrays, but I'm using an array of strings and indexing it like an array of arrays. Yeah, that was talking about sorts must be built on matches the array. Bugs. String being somewhat like an array of characters. How are you guys? Days going. Cliff music plays. See this copy text from many pages even though my code has sort of exuberant chased by a bear. Nice. I really like that. Storm 4 confirmed. I need something making more art for Storm bombs. Yeah, Storm 2 has been done actually. I know the winners. Full disclosure, this is the first time I'm announcing it. I'm not telling you who the winners are, but I know who they are. Because I need to decide if I'm going to do a quiet awards ceremony or if I'm going to do another stream as before. I'm airing towards a quiet awards ceremony just because just of time and busyness at the moment. Also editing videos and stuff. I've got some videos and I was quite pedantic about making sure everyone streamed to me, but yeah, I don't know how it could surpass the hype of Storm number 1, which was super hype. But yes, we've got a 3 and a 4, and I don't know if I'm going to do a 3 and a 4 competition. I may do, I may not. I may do a sort of a different style of competition that involves all of them. I might do a mission pack where you've got to diffuse all the missions on the, I don't know. Lots of potential ideas. But I do like on the subject of exuberant pursued by a bear. Did you hear David Tennant on Just a Minute talk about exuberant pursued by a bear? And it was his first time ever on the show, and it was his first ever thing, and he managed to speak for the full minute on the subject of exuberant pursued by a bear. It was fabulous. So fabulous, in fact, that I might even put it on. In fact, I'm going to do that and see if David Tennant can beat me. Yes, rid of a copy on the words is incredibly tedious. Let's have a look, see what my YouTube suggestions are, so everyone else can see them as well. Family Guy, Big Break, Penn and Teller, Fool List. Leonardo Dreams of the Flying Machine by what's his name, Eric Whittaker, and Donald Trump's Getting Roasted by Jonathan Pine. David Tennant, Exuberant Pursued by a Bear. Let's see if I can beat David Tennant. Yes. Is that not going to be that? No, it's the whole episode. We don't want the whole episode.
Welcome to Just a Minute.
David Tennant's also on 6:33. There we go.
The subject is a lovely one. Exit pursued by a bear. I don't know if you know where that comes, but it doesn't matter. Try and talk on the subject starting now.
Antigonus, in the third act of Shakespeare's late romance, The Winter's Tale, I believe it might be scene 3, brings the baby Perdita to a blasted hillside and leaves her, says something about going and never returning, and then exits pursued by a bear, possibly the most famous direction in theatrical history. I should say infamous because, of course, William of Stratford left actors and directors for centuries to come struggling with the dilemma of how you stage this. Do you just put the youngest member of the company in a big hairy suit and have him waggle his rubber claws at someone? Or does that puncture the drama of the moment somewhat? Do you have to do it more expressionistically, perhaps a sound effect or something with a stage technology being used to create the image for the audience in the mind? You would imagine that Bill of...
There we go. I managed to beat David Tennant, but that is a wonderful monologue. If you've never heard that game before, worth checking out. Right, Atom's gone over there, and I have compiled my lists. I'm going to come back in and check the chat, make sure everyone is behaving. List of unusual words beginning with T. Yes, that's no secrets on that one, where that one came from. Okay, so I've got my 5 lists. I now need to determine which of those 5 lists I need to use. That was a very tedious moment, I grant you. So tedious I need some wine. Let's determine which of those 5 lists we're going to use. And to do that, we need some edge work. So, first of all, as before, I'm going to set myself up a new method. Determine list. Determine list. And I'm going to pop this down here. There is a sort of a theory amongst sort of coding people, that you should have a method, like I've done in each of these. A method should do one function and only one function. That's generally good practice to do that. So in case you need to go back and tweak stuff later on. This one here is going to be determine list. Now for this, I'm going to need to introduce you to these fellas, if and else. This is probably the first function that I learned. I learned this before I knew what a string was, mainly because my history of coding, limited as it was in the realm of small BASIC, which was a simplified version of Microsoft Visual Basic. So that used if else a lot, and it's a really useful coding conceit if you've never come across it before. It basically does, if this statement is true, do this, otherwise do this. Or if this statement is true, do that, otherwise do that. It's essentially a little tree thing that can branch off. If that is true, do that, otherwise do this. If that isn't true, do this. If that isn't true, do this. If that isn't true, do that, and so on and so on and so on. So in this case, we want to determine which column to use. So if there are more than 4 batteries and the LED is not red, we're going to use this column. Otherwise, if that is true, use this column. Otherwise, if that's true, use this column. Otherwise, if that's true, use this column. Otherwise, use that column. And this in KTaNE translates very, very comfortably. Use otherwise is the common language seen in manuals. Translates very well into if else in C#. So let's start off with this one. That's the first thing we're going to need to code. And again, it can be quite a good idea just to copy over the body of text that you want, the thing that you're trying to recreate, just so that it keeps it focused and centered in your mind. So use if there are more than 4 batteries and the LED is not red. So if before we do that though, we're going to need something up here called a private string array correct column equals new string array 20. Now what that is up there is a new string array which is currently empty, it's currently full of null values, which I'm going to populate after I've determined the correct column. You don't need to do that, you can just use the same column, but I feel it might be useful for me to have a duplicate of the copy I'm going to use. And again, this is where it gets into sort of different things. I'm not saying there's one correct and one incorrect way of coding. This is just one thing that you might find useful to have when it comes to doing stuff later on. But you'll find different things out and try all different things. So let's come back to the if statement. If there are more than 4 batteries and the LED is not red, so let's look at this Edgework first of all. Bomb. That's how I'm going to determine the Edgework. And this thing that I was talking about before, this KMod kit up here, this is the thing that we're now really going to tap into to be able to determine the Edgework. So now there's a huge long list. If you just go down it, you can find out exactly what each of these methods are. I don't know them all off the top of my head, but what we're essentially doing here is we are referencing other scripts that we don't have, that we haven't written, that have been written as part of the mod kit. So we need to have some basic stuff. So this one I happen to know, which is get battery count, is what you type in there. That's the little method there. And that will return this figure as an integer of however many batteries there are on the bomb. As though to prove my point, I'm just going to blank that out a minute and just put a debug line. Debug.log bomb.get battery count. Now, when we go into the script, we hit play, and we come down to the console. Battery count on this bomb is 6 apparently. We've got 2 batteries, 2 batteries at 1, 1 and 2, so that's for a total of 6. So that would have been true in this case. Also, I've just spotted something that is slightly annoying me. I tend to use those as capital just because of convention. and therefore that wants to be capital as well. That's just a convention that I've done. As you can see, everywhere else I'm starting with lowercase, but for that particular one it looks very strange seeing it with a lowercase b. Although now I'm thinking I should probably try and break with convention and just stick with what's there. So that is how we're going to debug that. And if bomb.get to battery count, if there are more than 4 batteries, so if that number is greater than 4 and the LED is not red, so for and we're going to use a double ampersand here. That means both conditions have to be true. If you wanted an or, so if you wanted the other one, it's double bar. So on the Mac keyboard it's on the right hand side of the backslash shift. That's or. So and or. So if the battery count is greater than 4 and the LED is not red, well, how do we know if the LED is not red? Well, we saved the LED index up here, and this was the reason we saved it, because if we now go and look in keywords over here, we'll be able to see our LED options. Red was element 3. So if the LED index came out as 3, where is that? Yeah, this one here. If that came out as 3, it means that is 3. It means that is going to be element 3, which is red. So, and LED index, now we want it to be not equal to 3, not equal to red. So normally we go equals, because if we do a single equals, that changes the value, so that would mean LED index becomes 3. But we want it to be an, there's a word that I can't remember, a comparison point. So we want to check that that is 3, but we don't want to check that it is 3, we want to check that it's not 3. So to do that, we have an exclamation mark in place of the first equals. I know that sounds really arbitrary and slightly abstract, but that is the syntax of the code, and all of this is just syntax. So if you're going to take a lesson away from today, don't let it be that one, because that's a syntactical lesson, and that's the sort of thing you can read in the book, and it's the sort of thing that you pick up over time. So don't let that be the main lesson from today, but that's how we're going to do it. And LED index does not equal 3. So this line of code says, if there are the number of batteries on the bomb is greater than 4 and the LED is not red, is the translation of that, then do some stuff. And we're going to tell it what that stuff is in just a minute. We're going to come back and do that in a sec. First of all, we're going to write the rest of our tree branches. And to do that we have else if. So if that was not true, if it reads this and sees that it's false, it will go into the bracket. Sorry, it won't go into the bracket. It will ignore the stuff in the brackets and drop down to here and check for this one, if this one's true. So our next bit is this one. Otherwise, if I'm going too fast, I need to slow down. Not that I'll be able to check because I've got the chat open, but I will open it and check in a minute. Otherwise, use if there is an unlit bob or FRK or a lit car or IND. So we're looking for unlit bob, unlit FRK, lit car, lit IND. This could be read as the following: unlit bob or unlit RFK or lit car or lit IND, and the LED is not green. So what I'm going to do, just to demonstrate here, is replace the OR with the bars, and the OR with the bars, and the OR with the bars, and the AND with the double ampersand. Now, because logic is not quite the same as maths, and it's very difficult, you need to be explicit rather than implicit about the things you want to check. So there are essentially, as far as I'm concerned, 2 different bits of information here. It can be any of those. Oops. Any of those and that one. And this is where logic becomes a real stickler, and I've had some real pickles trying to get my head around this sort of stuff. And again, it will become easier with practice. And Ash has been a great help with me on this as well. But essentially what we want to ask the computer is, if there is either a lit bob or an unlit FRK or a lit car or a lit IND, if any of those are true, it will check the next bit, because this bit also has to be true. So there have to be two pieces of information that have to be true. One of those and that one. So if all of these are false, it won't even bother to check this bit, because we know it's going to be false. And actually that's how you tend to read the manuals as well. If you're going through, if there is this or this and that, then if the first bit fails, then you don't need to carry on reading it, you can just move on to the next bit. So we need to be quite explicit about how we're defining this code. So first of all, let's boot up an old script, probably Poker, because that's the one my go-to one for all the Edgework. It was my very first one that I programmed, and it's one where I've called on all of the Edgework. So let's boot that up. You can have a look at look at that. Oh, lovely, lovely if statements. Look at that. All of the lines of code. But what we're going to find is ports. Let's just lift this out a bit. So, else if bomb dot, oh no, it's not ports, we're looking for indicators, aren't we? There we go, that's the one we want. Okay, so I've logged off the B at the beginning as well. So, unlit bob, if bomb, so that's the other script, the information script I was looking at, bomb info script, dot is indicator off, yes, so off indicator is for bob, so bob, there's the first bit, and that's for the whole if statement, so those brackets need to stay on the outside, or, and I'll put the full parentheses in at the end, bomb dot is indicator off, open parentheses, open quotes, FRK, or bomb dot is indicator on, open parentheses, open quotes, lit car, CAR, or bomb dot is indicator on, open parentheses, open quotes, IND. So only one of those needs to be true for it to go on to check the next one. So of all those, even though they're already in parentheses, as I've said, these parentheses at the beginning here and at the end are for the entire if statement. So we're going to highlight everything that's inside, put some more parentheses in, and Atom very helpfully will put them at the beginning and at the end just by one tap of the first one. So if any of those are true, and we get to our second bit, and if the LED is not green, so LED index does not equal, and then green was, oops, where have you gone? LED options, green was element 1, LED does not equal 1, then do some stuff. Was that reasonably clear, what I just did there? I've just taken that is indicator off, that means an unlit indicator, and then which one, indicator off, and then which one, or indicator on, and then any of those can be true, and it will check the next one. If all of them are false, then it won't even bother to check the next one. And what I might just do is just put that in parentheses just to be absolutely explicit, so there's no way the code can get confused. And yeah, keeping track of the brackets is important. I say most decent notepad writers will show you where the beginning and the end is, so you can actually see here. If I just zoom in a bit, you can see that it's underlined the beginning and the end of those parentheses, so I can see that there aren't any stray brackets anywhere, and then that code will compile. I'm just going to check in with the chat and see that hopefully everyone is still on. Right. Distance between and or using conditions like this, they're pretty much always going to use the double symbol version of software. Absolutely. Bit wise If you want to check for just an indicator regardless of its state, what would be the simple way to do that? As in regardless of whether it's on or off. Honestly, I did that earlier on TW, and I just did this. Else if you want to check for either lit or unlit bob, for example, bomb dot is indicator on bob, a bib, bob, or bomb dot is indicator off. As far as I know, there is not an easier or more efficient way of doing that. So that just basically says if bob is present. I don't think there's a, but Ash might correct me on this, but is indicate, because as if I type that in there might be a get indicators. You can get on indicators, you can get off indicators, and you can get is indicator on, is indicator off. But as far as I know, you cannot tell. You have to have two different statements to check any state of it. But it's not a considerably longer process because there are only two statements: they're either on or they're off. Oh. I hope that makes sense. Oh, and I'm wrong. You have got is indicator present. Well, cover me in eggs and flour and bake me for 40 minutes. There's always something new you're learning. I did not know that. Is indicator present. And presumably you just go Bob. And that would do exactly the same thing. Do some stuff. Yep, like that. So there you go, is indicator present. And all of these are readily available in the mod kit. You can just sort of look up what they are. The reason I copy pasted from Poker, despite the fact it's a heinous script and I wrote it very nearly a year ago without knowing much about coding at all, is because it was my first one and therefore it was very Edgework heavy and it used pretty well every single permutation of Edgework you can do. Get serial number letters, is indicator off, get port count, is indicator on, is indicator on, add all the rest of it. So get serial number numbers dot sum, things like that. So it's useful for in that respect. Now let's move on to the third condition. We're going into ports at this point. So otherwise, if there was a serial port and a DVID port and the LED is not blue. So this one's a little easier because we're not confusing and or. So we're going to go bomb dot get. I'm going to check that with Poker. Yes, it's get port count port dot get port count. Open parentheses. Port, perfect port dot. And it is a serial port, so I think it's uppercase S. Yes, it is. Yes. Oh, it's uppercase P for port as well, apparently. Port dot serial. And we want to check that it is present. So it needs to be greater than or equal to 1 or greater than 0. Depends which one you want to work with. If you have equals 1, that means if there's two serial ports, that will return false, and we don't want that to happen. So it needs to be greater than or equal to 1. So if bomb.getPortCount port.serial is greater than or equal to 1, and bomb.getPortCount port.dvi, I think it comes under, close parentheses, is greater than or equal to 1. And finally, the LED is not blue, and LED index does not equal 0, I think. Yes, LED 0 does not equal blue, then that will return true. Fairly straightforward one. Finally, use if the serial number does not contain a vowel and the LED is not orange. Now for this one, I am actually going to borrow a line body and soul from Poker. New Right, okay. I did it with prime numbers, but I'm going to do it with vowels. I'm sure I did it with vowels somewhere here as well. In fact, I'm 100% certain I did it with vowels here, and I'm going to find it because I can't remember how I did it. But I would probably work it out if I absolutely had to. What I'm looking for is a little line of code I wrote that, I say wrote, it's not really a line of code, but it's a little thing that told me whether there are any vowels present. And I can't seem to find it right now. Though it is getting late and my eyes are starting to go a bit at the screen. No, I'm going to try and retroactively create it using this bit of code here. Let's copy that. So, we are looking for... Oh, that's a hideously long line of code. Let's copy this in, so we know what we're doing. Use if the serial number does not contain a vowel and the LED is not orange. So I'm going to populate this array, this new array, with the vowels A, E, I, O, and G. And we want to check to see if it doesn't contain that. So if new, A, E, I, O, U, and that's just creating a new little array thing there. Dot contains bomb dot. We don't want serial number numbers. We want serial number letters. We don't need the sum of them because now that should be an else if as well. So else if AIU we actually want does not contain. And I don't think it's as simple as doing that, so I might need to go back to the drawing board on this one. We'll get rid of that in a minute. There are very many brackets at the end. Oh, it doesn't like that either. 77 line 2. Now that should check whether or not it contains the serial. So just to unpick what I've done here, I've created a new little array of things, array of letters in this case, and I'm checking to see contains, this is this word here, whether bomb dot get serial number letters. That's what I'm looking for. The letters in the serial number contains those. But I want to see if it does not contain, and I can't quite remember where I put the exclamation mark. There might be a better way of doing this. I mean, the way I would have done this in the past would have been to go else if the way I've done all the others. Bomb dot get serial number letters. Dot does not contain. No, I wouldn't have done that. This is probably how I would have done it, but I can't remember where the exclamation mark goes. Let's check the chat. Yes, Visual Studio, the autocomplete is much better than the one I'm using on Atom. That's something Timwi's more than happy to remind you. Yes, it is. That and using var, that too. Can't think of many cases you thought var is required. Man, looking at that card one, it's yeah. Those were the days. They absolutely were the days when I used to code like that. And you know, I think that's kind of fine. It's quite nice looking back and seeing where I've come from. But oh, that's less nice. I've just done something to break it. Let's go back a few steps. Save. Now, why is it not recognising the lowercase bomb? Oh, it is. Okay, because I actually genuinely can't remember how to do this, just for a minute, I'm going to pretend like this is how I would have done it anyway, and actually this probably is how I would have done it, short of going back and checking another script where I've used vowels. I don't think of a code where I've used to check if there is a vowel present in the serial number, because I can't remember. Incidentally, there will be hundreds of shortcuts around this way, but here is one way of doing this. Else if bomb dot get serial number letters, that will return an array of characters. Dot contains, and then you want to go X. Oh shit, I remember how to do this. Tell you what I'm going to check. I'm going to check LED grid, because I do something similar in that. I'm sure there's one where I check the vowels of the serial number. There must be. It's about the fourth time I've opened the LED grid script today. Let's have a look. X. That's what I want. Dot select. Let's have a look. I used to know how to use select. No, it's not dot select. It's dot contains. Dot contains. It's not dot contains apparently. Who knew? Group by equals. Okay. This is funny. I used to know how to do this. I'm going to check poker once more, because it must be in the vowels. There it is. I knew how to find it if I looked hard enough. Get serial number letters dot any. That's the line of code. Wasn't looking hard enough. Okay, now I've got the code, I can actually tell you what it means. Else if bomb dot get serial number letters, so that's the same as before. Bomb, using that bit of script, get serial number letters, so get the letters out of the serial number. If any of them, in this case, at the moment it's checking to see if any of them are A or E or I or O or U. If any of the letters are a vowel, it will return true. And again, this is where we're going to get into hot water with logic and maths at this point. We want to check that the serial number does not contain any vowels. So we need to check that any of them are not A, and any of them are not E. And if I'm wrong at this point, Ash will certainly point it out to me in the code, because I've gotten this wrong many times in the past, and it still confuses me because logic is an inherently difficult thing to surmise. And just as a demonstration, actually, if you're confused by what's going on here, I've been doing this nearly a year and I'm still confused by it. But what this is essentially saying, it's getting all the letters in the serial numbers and it's checking are any of them A, E, I, O, or U. And if any of them are not A, and so it's all actually. Does that want to be all? I think that might want to be all. Yes, it does want to be all. So it wants to check that all of them are not A, and all of them are not E, and all of them are not I, and all of them are not O, and all of them are not U. And if that is the case, then it will return true. On top of which, we want to check that the LED is not orange. And so for that, we're going to go and again we're going to use parentheses to be safe. LED index does not equal whatever orange was. 2. So all this, if you've played logic in KTaNE, then this might make slightly more sense to you than it does to me. All please thank you, Ash. Cheerio TW, thank you for tuning in. It's good to have you, and do catch the VOD later. Do the letters require quotation marks? Yes. Incidentally, to answer your questions, they require quotation marks because they are characters, which are single characters from a string, rather than whole strings themselves, and they use single quotations rather than double quotations. Hearts is the word hearts while hearts don't go forever called hearts. And yes, thank you Ash for confirming it was all. And the and does not contain. So that will then do some stuff. And I think once I get to the end of this I might call it a night. I might very quickly just show you how to generate the letters, and then I'll pick this up another time. Because I've got to do all the logic and stuff and how to actually solve the puzzle. But hopefully this has been useful and not a complete waste of time, and we'll see. Feedback to me in Discord or stuff. So finally, the last condition is otherwise. We're going to use that column. So for that we're going to go else. And that's for everything else. If it doesn't conform to any of the above, we can do some stuff down there. So, use if there are more than 4 batteries and the LED is not red. Get battery count is greater than 4 and the LED index is not 3, which we know is red. Otherwise, use if there is an unlit bulb or an unlit FRK or a lit car or a lit IND. Bulb, FRK, on car, on IND, and the LED is not green. LED does not equal 1. Otherwise, use if there is a serial port and a DVI-D port and the LED is not blue. So we want serial port greater than or equal to 1, and DVI is greater than or equal to 1, and the LED index does not equal blue. Otherwise, use if the serial number does not contain a vowel and the LED is not orange. Get serial number if all of them are not A, and all of them are not E, and all of them are not I, and all of them are not O, and all of them are not U, and the LED index is not 2. Do some stuff. And then finally, do some stuff. We save. We compile. Now at the moment that's not going to do anything because we haven't actually told it to do anything in between determining those lists. Which is what we're going to do right now, because that is what we're all building towards. So what we were going to do, we were going to compile this new string array, this private string array which is currently empty and has null values for everything, with one of these. And we can do this in a number of ways. There's a janky way, which is the way I'm going to show you, and probably the way I'd do it unless I'd thought about it a bit more. And there's a neat way. And the neat way involves passing a variable through into a separate method and doing the same thing for this string, depending on what the column is. It would also probably involve an array of arrays, which I'm not going to do. So, we're going to use a loop. We're going to use a for loop for int, and this is how a for loop works. For int I equals 0, so for any number of things we want to iterate over in this loop, how many times do we want to run this loop essentially, the integer is going to start at 0, because computers start counting at 0 and that keeps it clean. If I is less than or equal to 19, because we want to iterate it 20 times to compile it up, I++, that means increase I by 1. So it's going to start at 0 and do it once. It's then going to increase I by 1, so it's 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 and then so on, till it gets to 19 when it's going to stop. So it's going to do this loop 20 times. And inside that loop, if this statement is true, then we know it's column 1. So, for each of them, we're going to redefine our correct column. Correct column, and remember there are 20 different elements in the correct columns, which are all empty. So correct column I, so that would be the first element when it does it the first time, and the second element when it does it the third time, and so on, equals column 1 I. There is probably a neater way of doing it, just directly copying one array to another, but I think this is quite a nice way of teaching you how a for loop works, because it's of all the functions and stuff that I'm showing you, this is probably the one I learned most recently. I learned this as recently as Lightspeed, I think. Before that I'd used them but not fully understood them, and now I do. So they're really quite helpful to use in that way. But as you can see, I'm going to do a bit of copy-pasta now. This is generally frowned upon when you're coding, because what we're saying is that the same thing is happening. It doesn't matter which one it's going into, the same thing is happening. It's just taking a different column, so I've got to change that to column 2. Now, in an ideal world, I would have this pass into a method and it would just take in the correct column, but because these are separate objects and they're not an array of arrays, I can't do that. I don't fully understand how to do an array of arrays, otherwise that's exactly what I'd do. So I'm going to do the same for column 3. So if that rule is true, then we want column 3 to be our correct one. If that one is true, we want column 4 to be our correct one. And if that one is true, then we want column 5 to be our correct one. So it's a slightly inefficient code, I think, but it's more efficient than manually one by one copying each of the elements over, which is what I would have done in the far-flung reaches of the past. So check in with the chat. That voucher, here's some alternative options. Thank you very much, Ash, for sharing that. That's really kind of you. I will look into that a little later on. Okay, so now, we've got a straight bracket there, don't we? There we go. Now we have compiled our correct column string array. Correct column string array. That is now the column that is going to be used when we come to compile the words, which I am going to show you very quickly since I spent the time to compile those lists, which took such a long time. So that will reach the end of the determine list method and will ping us back to the start up here. Now, I put in this little grayed out code if colour picked earlier on. The reason I did that is because, I'm just going to add this up here actually, the ball, colour picked. The reason I did that is because these two methods, pick LED, colour and determine list, they're only ever going to happen once on the module. Okay, they're not going to change from stripe to stripe, because the LED colour is going to stay the same, because we don't want it to, well actually, that having said, we could redetermine the list quite easily. But it's the thing of it is, repicking the list it's very unlikely to make much difference because most of it is to do with Edgework. So if you start off with this condition, let's say this column here, column 1 is true, and the LED is blue, and you start again, and the LED is orange, this column is still going to be true because the BOM Edgework won't have changed. It's only going to change if that LED becomes red, which then to my mind strikes me as trying to be a bit disingenuous and catch people out, because it's unlikely that the column will change, but possible. So if the LED ends up becoming red, people have to then go through, and I think that's sort of against the spirit of it, because it feels a bit sneaky. So let's say that did become red, then that one might be untrue, and then you once you do figure out the second one, you're only ever going to bounce between two. So to my mind, it just makes sense just to, once the column is picked, keep it the same. Which brings me back to this little boolean here, the colour picked. So if the colour has been picked, which at the beginning it won't have been, because it's by default set to false. If the colour is picked, we're going to make it true, and then do these. And the reason we're doing that is because if we get a strike, we're going to come back into the start method. So down here later on, I'm going to put a strike invoke thing, which is going to ping us back to start. But what I don't want it to do, I don't want it to come into here and redetermine the list and repick the colours. I want it to repick the words, but not here. So if we get a strike, it's going to fire us back into the start. But because colour picked will now be true, because I've just set it to true there, so once it goes through it once, it sets it to true, and it can't ever get back into it. That's locked out, so we'll always now bypass those two. Okay, final thing, and then I am going to call it a night and pick up this stream another time. Pick words. And this is the exciting bit, because this is actually going to start looking at the screen and changing the module rather than just looking at code. So we want a new void, pick words, and so I'm just going to check in the chat. Wait a second, it only enters that clause if it's true and the clause makes it true. Yes. which means it can only give us. It means it only can only ever enter in there once. So at the start, it's going to come down. It's going to recognise that this is false. Oh, incidentally, what I did there, that's a boolean. Boolean, it would look like that, but because booleans, you don't actually need to put equals true or equals false, because they only default to one or the other. So that would be a boolean as true, and that would be a boolean as untrue or false. So that means if it's true, sorry, it should be false. That's my mistake there. If thank you for pointing that out. I wouldn't have spotted that otherwise. Yeah, you. I've just come back to the chat and seen what you've said there. Yeah, so if the colour hasn't been picked, it should be. Beg your pardon. Then it will go in there and make it true, and then it will never ever go in. Well spotted that. That's something I would have annoyed me, and I wouldn't have been able to see why that wasn't working. So that will then lock it out of that code, and so if it comes back to the start method, it won't go through these two, it will go straight into the pick words, which is what we're going to write now. How exciting. This is actually relatively straightforward because this is all stuff we've already done. So we're going to go for another for loop, int I, and we always call integers I. We define them as I when we're doing these loops because it's just a custom. I'm not sure where the custom comes from, but there's other things that we define as X and other things we define as J, and but integers for I, and then you move forward if you do more of those I, J, K. Integer I equals 0, I is less than or equal to 3, I plus plus. So what that means is going to loop through something 4 times. Okay. Now, in the meanwhile, I'm actually going to need to define a new list up here. And again, this is a slightly janky fix for something that I do, and there are far better ways of doing it. I just need to find a code where I've done a list before. Lists. Going back to LED grid a lot. There we go. A list is basically the same as an array. Oh, I can get rid of that now. The only difference being an array is fixed in value. So if you define an array as 4 objects, it will only ever be 4 objects long. Whereas list can vary, and by default starts off with 0. So we're going to go public list int chosen words index. What do we call that? What I've just created up here is and it doesn't need to be public either, you can make that private, is a little list that is going to store numbers that we've picked, because we don't want any duplicate words. So we're going to store the numbers that we've already contained. And so to do that, we're going to go while. This is a different type of loop that will go through, and this is where you end up getting locks in the engine if you've coded it incorrectly. It will just lock the program because it will never ever break free of the while loop and just do it for infinity. So you need to be careful when you're doing these. While. Oh no, we don't need to do while. I want to pick a number first. So we're going to call it index or int index. So a new integer, and we're going to call it index Unity engine dot random dot range 0 to 20. So it's going to pick a number between 0 and 19, and we're going to assign that. But before we do that, we need to add our while loop. While index, no, not index, chosen word index. So this is this list I've just made, which is currently empty. So while that list contains the number we've just picked, is going to pick it again. Let me just break this down a little bit. We're going to pick up an integer, an index is what we're going to call it, and define it as a number between 1 and 20, or 0 and 19. Now, while that number is somewhere on this list, of chosen words index. It should be indices, but never mind. But I'm going to change it to indices, otherwise it will bother me. Indices. While that number's on the list, it's going to pick a different one, which basically says if it picks a number that is on that list, pick a different one. Now, of course, the first time it goes in here, it's not going to do that. It's not going to do it first time because it's going to say, well, I haven't got any numbers on that list. So I'm not going to iterate this loop, so I'm just going to bypass it because that number is not on the list. And this is where we add it. Chosen words indices dot add index. Now that will add the word to the list. So the next time, because we're inside a loop itself, we've got to run this 4 times. Once we've added that on, it will come back to the second run around and pick a different number. So if it picks 2 the first time, it'll look and see, well, there's no 2 here because this list is empty. I'm going to add 2 to the list. It'll do some more stuff, which we'll do in a minute. It'll come back around to do it for the second time. Int index, right, I'm going to pick 2. It's going to come down to this while loop and see, oh, hang on, 2's on this list. And while 2 is on that list, I need to change what it is. So we'll go into index, pick a random number, let's call it 2. Oh, 2 is still on the list. 2 is still on the list. 2 is still on the list. I'm going to pick a 3. Okay, 3 is not on the list. Let's add 3 to the list. And that's what that while loop does. It does theoretically mean the code could run infinitely if your random number generator and on an infinite timeline, that is something that would happen on an infinite timeline. You would get a code that runs for, 10,000 years because it keeps picking a random number unless the code is written in a different way. Ash will be able to correct me on that. But chosen word indices to add index. Now we've got our index. It's now a unique index, and now we need to do something with that index. So what we're going to do is, because we're in this for loop and we haven't actually used these i's yet. Okay, so remember way back we had our KM selectable words. We now need to add something new. We need to add some text meshes, and again it's going to be an array word text, or words text we'll call that. Pubic, we don't want to write pubic, we want to write public. That's a very embarrassing thing to write. Public text mesh words text. Now this is, whereas the selectables are the physical things you click, the text mesh is going to be the physical text that appears. Okay, so you're talking about lots of stuff without me. That's cool. I'm sure you're still watching as well. Pick random extension method that can pick unique selections. Very nice, very nice. I should get one of those. Where was I before I started talking about pubic text meshes? Yeah, I've just added this new text mesh thing in here, and hopefully that's going to words text. There we go. And again, that's going to be an array of 4. Or alternatively, remember, we can just go words, lock this. And it's not the word surface we want, we actually want the text 1, text 2, text 3, text 4 to select and drag them into the inspector like that. Deselect, and close, and save. Okay, it's going to do something, it's going to start doing something interesting in a minute. So, we've now got our new words text mesh, and that's an array, so we've got 4 of them there. And because we're doing this 4 times, you can see where this is going. Words, text, I. Because I is going to be all 4 numbers. It's going to start off at 0, and then it's going to increase. And it's going to be a different number every time. Words, text, I, dot text, because we're talking about text meshes here, equals correct column, so the correct column that we're using, index. And that's the index that we've just selected, which is of course reselected each time. Words text I dot text equals correct column index. And it's going to do that 4 times, which means if we've done this correctly, which I believe we have, we're going to run this script now, and these 4 words won't be tatterdemalion, tanandua, taphogenesis, and tabernacular. They're going to be 4 different words every time. Let's have a look. Oh, no, because I've obviously not set something up properly. Because I got object reference not set to an instance of an object error, which was okay. I actually don't know. Where's that come from? Let's put that into there. Let's save. Let's have a look at this error in a bit more detail. It says line 110. So, again, this is the sort of thing that's going to come up all the time. I genuinely wasn't expecting that to come up, but there we are. We look in the console, and it will say line 110. And you can also see it's logging the LED is purple, which is a good thing, because it means it's got that far in the script before it's run out of stuff. So it says 110, something is going wrong, while chosen words indices dot contains index. So something in this little loop that we've written here it's not happy with. So where do we think it's not happy? Are there 19 words or are there 20? Oh, 19. Is this to do with the array? I set up the array wrong. This is where you can look at the code and you can debug it. What to do with that? Intent that's equal to not 20. That contains index. Index is not 20. Chosen with index dot add index. Was text I dot text equals correct column index. I would assume that is coming from there, but I may be wrong because it's calling me out on line 110. Well, it's calling me out because chosen words indices is empty, and so it can't check. Might be that. I wonder if anyone's got any bright ideas. Oh, I've been pinged. It's an empty collection or null collection. I don't think you defined it, so hoping you'll remember to look at chat. Yeah, that was it. No. That's what I forgot. It's an empty, empty. I would have got there eventually. You see, one is never done learning. So we're actually going to call it private list int equals. What did I call it? Chosen word indices. Chosen words indices equals new list. Now, just like I was saying before, if you're not doing it publicly, you need to define it at the beginning, which I did with the string above it, but for some reason I decided not to do it with the list right there. So it didn't know what it was. It was basically a null list. So now, when we go in, fingers crossed, that's all going to be defined correctly. There we go. Tango receptor, tectosphere, tachyphrasia, and tychoscopy. Next up we go again. We'll get 4 different words. Terpsicorium, tabernacular, tamandua, and tatterdemalion. With a purple line. And you can see every single time this is going to be a different collection of words from the correct list. Okay. We're now getting tantalisingly close to actually getting this finished, but sadly I really must retire because it is getting very close to 1 AM and my wife is not very well. But she did know that this was a predetermined thing. There are a few more things I'm going to add to this before we're done. obviously the first and most obvious thing is I need to program what the correct answers are and what happens on a strike and so on. I need to show you about adding interaction punctures and adding sound and stuff. And one thing I really want to do is add some different colours to these texts right here. Genuine question for the stream right now: do you think these texts, this font rather, is illegible, or do you think it's a manageable font, or do you think it fits into the sort of flavour of the module a little bit? Because I think that one, I think it fits into the flavour of the module slightly. Although it might be nice if they're a little bit wider, because that's sort of as wide as they go. AshTheBash in there again. Tachygraphy. It looks like a J. That's my problem with it. The T looks too much like a J. Anyway, the font could be better. Actually, you bring that up in chat about pressing it. Actually, I got rid of that debug line, but actually, let's bring it back in. That was why I left it there, obviously. So let's try it now. We get new words, which are not AshTheBash and so on. So tachygraphy. The word you press is tachygraphy. Tarantella. The word you press is tarantella. Tablature. The word you press is tablature. AshTheBash. The word you press is AshTheBash. Let's just pause and make sure it wasn't a fluke. LED is red, so it's not in that correctly. Tango receptor, tabernacular, tachyphrasia. My mouse isn't doing the thing. Tectosphere. So I was going to add a full stop to the end of that, plus stop. Obviously I won't keep that as a log. As and when I do log that, I will log in the log format section. So we can see it's working, and it's recognising the fonts in the proper way. I agree that the fonts could be better. I do like it, and hopefully I've shown you how to create a font was not a wasted exercise. But yeah, as pretty as it is, I think it's too difficult to read on an already difficult to read module. That's my thoughts on that. Anyway, I think I am going to call it a night right there. As we started out with sort of 15, we dropped down to 6, and thank you very much for although again the users in here suggest there are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. That suggests there are 17 people watching, so I just don't know what the demographics are. But if you're watching, you're very welcome. I'm going to get rid of the drawstring and go back to that for now. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found it useful. My goal in all of this is to encourage more people to start modding, and hopefully I've also demonstrated that if you maybe, because I certainly don't, but if you look at my modules and think, God, that's awesome, I'd never be able to create anything like that, I want to tell you you're wrong. I didn't even know what an if statement was 12 months ago. I've been doing it a relatively short space of time. I've had a lot of help from people on the Discord, but nothing in terms of training or college courses, or my background as a musician and not as a coder. So all I've had is help from other people like Ash, who's once again, I'm very grateful to him for his support this evening. From people like Ash and from people like Timwi and Zeknix and River and Red and loads of other people, too many to name, in the Discord, who've helped me get to the position where I'm now able to actually start helping other people, which is really nice. And if you think that it's an insurmountable obstacle to overcome, then I just want to tell you it's not. It's a little bit of a learning curve at the beginning, but it's one that you never stop learning on. There's always something else. There's always a better way a more efficient way of writing your code, and it's more important just to get stuck in and do it. And I think for a lot of people the barrier to entry is the coding part of it. for a lot of people I've spoken to, the barrier to entry is actually getting the prefab set up and getting to grips with Unity. And both of them are relatively easy. And as I say, this video, which will become multiple videos, will be available as a tutorial series on YouTube. It'll also be available, certainly for a few weeks at least, as a VOD on Twitch. So do go back and watch through again, and hopefully, if I've gone through something too quick, you can go back and have a listen again. And on top of which, I'm always happy to answer questions or chat with people either in voice chat or in just in text chat on the Discord. Just send me a DM or send me an email. I think my website's on. Is my website on the splash screen? It's not. It normally is. But send me an email, send me a DM on Discord, and I'd love to help you get started if you think you've got a really good idea. Because that's the thing. That's the one thing I can't really teach you is how to come up with a good idea. I'm not entirely convinced I know how to come up with good ideas. I just do stuff. So if you've got a good idea and you want to have a go, because it is really rewarding as well. It's really fun to do. The reason I do coding is I've actually played the game relatively little. Because I get a great, and I enjoy the physical act of coding and making the module and putting it into the workshop. The act of creation I find to be quite gratifying and quite enjoyable. So if I would encourage anybody who's anybody just to give it a go, and there will be people about to give you a hand if you get stuck, because it is quite daunting. I think it's a really worthwhile thing to do.